About 2 years ago, I quit my 9-to-5 corporate engineering job with no other job lined up. And I've been asked a bunch of times since then whether or not I recommend people do this, or have had friends or family members be like,
should I just quit my job with nothing lined up too?
And while I think that there are times where it could actually be the best thing for you, there are also a lot of times where it's not the best thing. So today I want to share with you guys what my opinion now is 2 years after quitting my job with nothing else lined up on whether or not having no plan is actually a good plan. So when I first quit my job, I did not have any plans on going back into or staying in the engineering or corporate world. I knew that I wanted to work for myself, make money on my own, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do to actually do that yet, nor did I have anything lined up to actually start generating me an income. So the first thing I did after quitting was actually just do gig work. I was shopping on Instacart and doing Rover pet sitting to make some money here and there to offset my bills so that I wasn't digging into the pot of savings that I had accumulated before quitting as quickly. Fast forward to now, I'm actually making more money each month than I was making at my 9-to-5 job, and I've been doing that consistently for about 5 months now, and it's looking like that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. But the first thing you need to ask yourself if you're debating quitting your job without anything else lined up is, what is it that you actually are trying to do? I think that there's about 3 main groups of people who want to quit their job. There's the people that want to quit to work for themselves, build their own business, create content on social media. There's the second group, which is the people that just want to change career paths. Maybe they're in engineering and they want to go into marketing, but they actually are okay with working under someone else. They want to stay in corporate or in general continue to be an employee. And then the third group are the people who actually want to stay in their current career path. They're happy with the types of companies they're working for. They just don't like the specific one they're working for right now. Maybe they have a toxic boss or bad coworkers that they work with, or in general, the work environment is just not what they want, or they want to move cities. And at the end of the day, if you are so fed up with your current job that you're debating quitting without another one lined up, what I would first ask yourself is, which group are you in? Because if you're in group A and you're looking to work for yourself, then I think quitting without anything else lined up is actually quite a viable option, and we'll get into more specifics with that going forward. If you're in group B and you're looking to change career paths, I think you're in kind of the middle ground. You could potentially quit your job without another lined up and look for internships or go back to school or spend time focusing on building out a portfolio and gaining experience that may not be paid if you have saved up enough money. But it also might just be beneficial for you to stay in the current career path you're in to be able to make money to pay your bills while you build out that portfolio or get those skills and experience that you need in the new path you want to go down, or even go back to school part-time to get the education you need to go into the career that you want. And then thirdly, if you're looking to just move companies, then I would say that this is not the best plan. You have a much better chance of getting another job if you currently are in a job and show that you've been doing a good job at that job. So I would say start applying for jobs as much as you can. This might be where you want to try out the whole quiet quitting thing. Don't put in extra hours at your job and just spend your extra time outside of work, applying to new jobs, making connections, networking, things like that. And only consider quitting without another job lined up if you are planning on taking some type of sabbatical and you're able to communicate that to your current and future employer. If you think you're going to have a hard time communicating to them why you have a gap on your resume, then I would suggest staying in your current job until you find a better one to switch over to. So the second most important thing to consider is how much money you actually have saved up. If you have no money saved up, then quitting your job without anything else lined up is a terrible idea, to be blunt. You want to make sure you have at least 6 months of expenses saved up in cash to utilize after you quit your job and no longer have that consistent salary coming in. You also should have at least a mini plan of an alternate way to make money each week and each month while you're figuring out what your next step is after quitting. So again, like I said earlier, for me, that was doing gig work. It was a super easy way that I could just go out, make a few quick dollars during the day and come back and focus on my business and my YouTube channel in the evening without being super stressed, because that's a huge component of why people want to leave their jobs to pursue something else in general. When you're in a job that you're unhappy with, you're unaligned with, it's really hard to be motivated after the 9-to-5 hours to actually build up a business or create a social media presence or apply to other jobs or go back to school. So sometimes all we need to do is find an alternate way to make money that that is not as stressful as our current job to be able to supplement while we build up this new path that we want to go down. And then the last piece of the puzzle for your finances is to think about whether or not you have a super duper, very last resort backup plan for how you're going to pay for any extreme emergencies. Because a lot of people, me included, end up using their emergency fund to pay for their monthly bills in that period after quitting and finding a new job or a new way of making money. For me, that was at 6 months of expenses. I had the chunk of cash, but it was no longer my emergency fund. It was now just my cash that I was using to pay my bills each month. If an emergency came up, such as our car fully broke down or me or my husband got extremely sick, we would have not had the cash money to be able to handle that emergency. And if we didn't have our ultra backup, we would have had to go into debt for that emergency. So for me, what my ultra backup plan was my retirement fund. I had about $13,000 in my 401k when I left my 9-to-5 job. Making sure that is fully vested before you quit is also super important, but I'll talk about that in a future video. But if you have a retirement fund, I would sit down and calculate what the penalty will be if you were to withdraw that money early before obviously you hit retirement, to figure out how large of a nest egg you would have to use in said emergency while you're in the period between jobs. So the third thing, and now I'm realizing these are not necessarily in order of importance, they're all extremely, if not evenly important. The third thing to consider is who depends on you. If you are living completely by yourself, you are at a much lower risk tolerance level to quit your job because your overall expenses are much lower. Although I've talked about this in the past, how when you live on your own, it can actually be more difficult to do this because you are paying for all your expenses on your own versus if you have roommates or you're married and you split expenses with your spouse or you live at home with your parents. All of these situations allow you to kind of depend on others to help you while you're in this situation. But living on your own is also a great way to handle it because you have full control over exactly how low you get your expenses. You could move into the smallest apartment possible if you really wanted to, and it would ultimately just be your decision. Versus if you're married, which is the situation I was in when I left my job, although my husband was only working part-time, 30 hours a week at most, and making minimum wage when we were living in DC, and I was actually the sole breadwinner before I quit my 9-to-5 job, I still had to consider him because he did depend on me for income, and the apartment that we lived in and all of the expenses we had were all things that also affected him if those were to change. So the decisions that we made with our finances, our expenses, our living conditions ultimately was a joint decision that I wanted to discuss with him, and I couldn't just, go do whatever I wanted to make ends meet after quitting my job. And if you have kids or you have parents that are relying on you for some part of their income or their well-being, then it's even harder and more difficult for you to quit your job without any other job lined up because you will not have a salary to back up the salary that you're losing, which is why I go back to the beginning conversation about thinking really about why you're doing this. And the more you have people depending on you, the more of at least some form of a plan you should have in place before you actually quit your job. And then the last thing to consider is how big of a risk would it actually be, and what is the worst that could actually happen if you were to quit your job without another job lined up. For a lot of people, this situation seems terrifying and that the worst case scenario is basically equivalent to the world ending. But if we really sit and think about it, we start to realize that these are usually just fears and insecurities that we have that we're able to overcome and break through to allow ourselves to go down that path less traveled and start working on our dreams and ultimately be able to quit the job that you hate so much without another one lined up. So in practice, what this looks like is really thinking about why you are so afraid or why you're even watching this video about whether or not it's a good idea to quit your job without another one lined up. Write down all the things that come to mind as fears or insecurities or just things that make you think this is not possible for me to do. And then write out what the worst case scenario would look like if that fear was to come true. For me, I realized that my largest fear was that we were going to have to default on our lease. So then the next question I asked myself was, what would happen if we were to default on our lease? And what would happen would be we'd have to move back to Florida and move in with family because we wouldn't have money nor the means to be able to get a new apartment or have a place to live in general. And so when I asked myself, well, why am I so afraid of this scenario? It was because I realized I would have to depend on my family or other people to be able to help me out of a bad situation that I created for myself. And although that was terrifying for me, once I was able to break it down and really understand the emotional component behind it, I realized that I did have people in my life, family and friends, that cared about me and Oliver enough where if we did default on our lease, they would rather me have quit my job because of how bad it was affecting me emotionally and mentally, and in turn have to support us in some way or let us live with them for a little bit to get back on our feet, because they really did care about me. And once I realized that and was able to kind of break away from that concept of I have to be so independent and do this all by myself, and realize that I did have that privilege and that ability to be able to utilize the resources around me and actually lean on the people that care about me, it felt a little bit less scary, but still only a little bit. But the funny thing about all of this is, although we did not default on our lease after all was said and done, we ended up actually finishing out our lease and moving back to Florida and moving in with family. We moved in with Oliver's sister and brother-in-law down in Florida, and we weren't paying them any rent. They were just helping us out and letting us live in their guest room. And we lived there for about 2 months before we were able to get our cash flow back up a little bit, save up some money to be able to move into our apartment that we're now in here in Orlando, Florida. So if it wasn't for our family members, we would have had a much harder time being able to transition from DC back down to Florida into an apartment that we actually liked and were actually able to afford at the end of the day. Those 2 months of no rent expenses really helped us out because we were paying close to $2,000 up in DC for our rent, and 2 more months of that is $4,000. When we moved back down to Florida, we ended up using up the last bit of our savings to actually get down here. And then we were able to save up enough to pay our deposit and our first month of rent and living expenses to move here to Orlando. And then after a few months, that kept snowballing. My husband got back to work because he had taken time off during the move, and things got back to normal and we're at a much better place now. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm now making more money than I was making at my 9-to-5 job. So at the end of the day, my biggest fear and the reason why I was so afraid of that was actually my biggest resource and the thing that ended up being necessary to allowing us to get to where we are today. So I challenge you to write out your fears associated with this and see how big of a risk is it actually for you to quit your job without another one lined up. Make sure you have all the boxes ticked for the first 3 reasons, and if everything lines up and makes sense, then take the plunge and go for it. Because what I found for me is that by doing this and creating this risk in my life, me as someone who is a huge planner and used to be very risk averse is now much more capable of handling challenges like this and doing it in stride and actually making improvements and having growth in my life and doing things that scare me, which ultimately got me to where I am today. If I hadn't consistently pushed myself out of my comfort zone, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have been on an interview for CNN. I wouldn't be making any money from my YouTube channel. I wouldn't have the number of clients that I have to be able to freelance and work from anywhere and be flexible with my time and actually make more money than I was making in my old job. So sometimes you have to take risks to actually be able to get the reward and get to the place you want to be. So I'm curious, let me know in the comments down below what your biggest fear is of quitting your job without another one lined up, or just quitting your job and starting to work for yourself in general. I'm also curious why you want to quit your job without another one lined up. Which of the 3 groups from the first point are you in? But that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope this was helpful for you, and let me know down in the comments if there's any other things you would like me to talk about in future videos relating to this concept. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.